All right, so the main idea of this section is we want to go with kind of the tried and true method for solving a quadratic equation. It's basically any equation that is of this form: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a and b are real numbers and a does not equal 0. If a equals 0, then that whole term is gone and we're back to just a linear equation. So that's not the situation that we're looking at here. We're assuming we have an a, a b, and a c, and real, and they could be 0, but as long as a is not 0. And we have one method that, regardless of whether or not you can factor it, or even if you could factor it, or any other method you could do to solve these, we have one method that will always work for these, and it is the quadratic formula. So it's a very good idea to be really good at this formula first and foremost, because all of these you'll be able to solve with it, whereas only some of them can be factored. And you may even come across one that can be factored, but you might be having trouble with it and don't realize it could be factored. So then the quadratic formula will work. So my recommendation is get really, really good with it. And so the idea is that we can solve for values of x by using this. It's the opposite of b, so negative of b. So if b is negative, then it becomes back to positive. If it's positive, we put in negative. So the opposite of whatever it is, plus or minus, that'll give us our two answers, because these quadratics have two answers typically for them, two solutions. So opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And just to kind of make this clear, I'm going to just do some quick highlights. This coefficient out in front is a, and that's it. It goes right there and there. This coefficient here, b, is this one right there, b squared, and b right there. And then lastly, that c, that constant, goes right there. And that's where you would plug in each of these things. And so I'm going to do the first one as an example, and I'm going to show you it both by doing it as a quadratic and by factoring. So if you look at this, we can actually factor this one. We have a 4x that can be divided out. So we'll have a 4x times, and then we end up with just an x plus 2 equals 0, like that. So we divided a 4x out. This then tells us we essentially have a times b equals 0, right? Where like this is something and this is something else. And when we're multiplying two numbers together and we get 0, that means at least one or both of them have to be 0. And so what we can do here is just say, well, what values of x would make either the first thing 0 or the second thing 0? So if we look at the first thing, we can say what value of x will make 4x equal to 0. If we look at the second part here, we can say what values of x make x plus 2 equal to 0. And then anything that does that will be a solution for us. So over here, we divide both sides by 4, and we get just x is equal to 0. That's one of our answers. And for this one, we subtract 2 from both sides, and we get x equals -2. That's the other one of our answers. If you were to plug these back into the original equation up here, you would find that they would both work. If you plug in 0, this becomes 0, this becomes 0, and therefore it equals 0. If you plug in -2, well, you get -2 squared, that's 2. 2 times 2 is, or 2 times 4 is 8. And then over here, you get -2 times 8, which is -8. So you get 8 plus -8, which is also 0. So it works to solve both of them. However, if you came across this problem and you thought, oh, I don't realize that I can factor this, or you didn't even try to factor it or something like that, which you really should try first because it's usually faster. But if you happen to not realize you could have factored it, you could also have written this out as 4x squared plus 8x plus 0 equals 0. Okay? And by doing that, we have our A, B, and C. And so we could say A equals 4, B equals 8, and C equals 0. So if one of them is missing, you just add it back in. And we can go ahead and plug it into our equation there. X equals the opposite of B, so negative 8, plus or minus the square root of B squared, which is 8 squared, minus 4 times A times C, which is a 0, all square rooted, all over 2 times A, which is 4. This then gives us negative 8 plus or minus. Here we have 8 squared, which is 64. And on this part, we have 4 times 4 times 0. So that whole part right there inside there is a 0. And so we just have a square root of 64 over 2 times 4 is 8. End up with negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 is 8 over 8. And so now we have essentially two answers here for x. One we can do with the plus. X equals negative 8 plus 8 over 8. And the other we can do is x equals negative 8 minus 8 over 8 from that plus or minus. Negative 8 plus 8 is 0, and 0 divided by 8, that is 0, which matches up with one of our previous answers over here. And then this one is negative 8 minus 8, which is negative 16, and negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2, which matches up with our other answer. So once again, if you're ever stuck, you can't see how to factor these, or one of them cannot be factored, or at least you think it can't be factored, you can always fall back to using this quadratic formula up here to solve these quadratic equations. So that is the thing I would focus on most, get really good at that, and be able to always fall back on that whenever you need. All right, thank you very much. After this, we're just gonna do some practicing of problems.